I'm so interested in this concept of rewiring our brains. And
Yeah.
so maybe you can kind of dive into like, what does rewiring mean?
Rewiring is actually remyelinating, rebuilding the nerves in a pattern that you actually want. Most of our nerves are built in a default pattern. Our nerve connections are what our neuroassociations are, because we build them in a state of fear. We have that same physiologic response. And we call that a belief, right? But instead of a belief, that's just a pattern. And so what I do is I take these patterns and I rewire them by rebuilding new nerve pathways through questions and rebalancing the brain. That's what rewiring is to me.
That makes a lot of sense. So you said something, beliefs are really just patterns that are wired into our brain. And, I look at a lot of the science of like habit formation, for example. And what happens there is when you do something over and over and over again, your brain forms more connections between the neurons that make that activity happen. So it becomes more automatic, right? And so I think what you're saying is beliefs are a similar process.
They're exactly a similar process.
Dr. Rewire, thank you so much for joining us on the Extend podcast today.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. I've been following your work on social media, and you have a lot of celebrity clients that come to you.
I do. I'm fortunate enough over the years to be able to work with people who are looking to perform better, get more mental performance out of their life, and a lot of athletes, celebrities kind of fall into that space.
Yeah. And so I really want to dive into kind of your background and also how you got to where you are today, because I think it's a very interesting story.
Yeah.
But before that, I want to just ask you, like, what are you most passionate about right now? What do you love speaking about the most? What is your main passion and the message you're putting out there?
I think the biggest thing when I look at it is living what I call living an inspired life. What that means is really getting congruent with the mind and the body. I remember, being 15, 16 years old and watching like people like Deepak Chopra talk about this stuff, right? Way back when. And it was like, there's a science to living an inspired life. And I think today, in today's world with mental health and people's challenges, a lot of it is that they don't really just know how to get there. And that's kind of what I love helping people with.
That's great. And what do you think people get wrong when they are looking into living an inspired life? Or what is a misconception that most people have there?
It's a great question. I think the biggest thing that they do is that they actually fall back to living what other people expect of them rather than having the courage to live their own values, what I call your rewired DNA. And they don't know what that is, so they fall into just whatever's norm in society. Right? No. And if you're going to live an inspired life, that means that you're going to have to do things that are completely different and completely beyond the norm of what your normal society expects of you.
Absolutely. And so is that the definition of living an inspired life?
Well, actually, the definition is really much more biological than not. So the definition of inspiration is bringing breath in. Right? Right. As we inspire, right? It's about breathing in. So what do you do that brings life to you? It's actually a health protocol, right? And when we die, we say the person is expired, taking oxygen away. Right. So whatever you do, we've been able to show this, and we know this, is that when you have more oxygen in the body, you have more energy and longevity. And so when I use the word inspired, it's not like a motivational type term. It's actually much more a physiologic term than using it from standpoint.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So how do you bridge that kind of gap for people? And maybe you can help me kind of explain this mind-body connection and how these two things kind of work together in getting to a point where you're living an inspired life.
I think when you look at it, right, like for people, they say, I want to do this. And they have all these challenges. They say, if you can say to yourself that I love my life and I love what I do every single day of my life, versus using language like I have to, I need to, I should, I want to, or I choose to. These things are still are forms of subordination to society, to people. But if you can get up in the morning, and it sounds so crazy to do what it is you love to do, and it sounds so personal development-ish, and it's not. It's really not, because if you really structure your life and wire your brain to be able to do what it is you want to, then you can, but it's also not doing the things you don't want to. Right?
Yeah.
And we know that from that, you create a physiologic effect in your body.
Absolutely.
Someone who is inspired by their life has longevity, right? We talk about longevity a lot. Sure. You and I are in that longevity space. But the one thing that's never really discussed is what I call mental longevity. We talk about, plasma exchange and TRT and all these physical things that are out there, but nobody talks about what's the mind, what's the mental. You can cold plunge all day you want to, but if mentally you're not inspired by your life, you're not excited by your life, I don't care how many cold plunges you can do. You're still going to be depressed, and it's going to shorten your lifespan.
Right, right. No, that's so true. Like, you're right. We do focus a lot on keeping our cells alive and healthy. But when you think about what's going on up here,
Yeah.
there's not a lot of focus on that. I mean, in fact, all we do is kind of wear it down with the levels of stress that we're under, and and just the physical world that we keep putting ourselves in contact with people that are negative in our life, or the amount of work we put ourselves through and not taking mental breaks, et cetera. Right?
I think so. I think the term health has been confused, in my opinion, at least, right? We say health is just a physical attribute, right? And during COVID, we all came along and said, okay, there's this thing called mental health now.
Yeah.
And then if you really stop and think, now, okay, COVID's now gone, where's the conversation of mental health? It's almost evaporated if you really listen to it.
Mm-hmm.
But it meant we can't have physical health without mental health, and we can't have mental health without physical health.
Sure.
They work together, right? Like our serotonin's made in our stomach. We know this. Neurotransmitters are made in our stomach. They affect how we think. How we think, we know, controls how our body functions.
Right.
So to me, it's just mind-body connection is health.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you kind of got to this space where you're a performance coach to celebrities and many people, and like what was that tipping point for you where you decided this is what you want to do?
I think it's been an evolution, to be very honest with you. I don't think it was one day.
Okay.
I think it's been a journey where I've kind of always wanted to do this, where I always wanted to sit and say, what do I want to do? I want to help people live what they want to do in their life. How do they get better? How do they perform better? For me, I was in practice. I started my career as a chiropractor, physical therapist, then became a chiropractor, and then went through the journey of being a chiropractor. But I always used to notice him, and I built a big business in chiropractic and did from that standpoint. But I noticed again and again and again, Darshan, is that when people came in, like a lot of the issues were mental. Like I say this story all the time, but I had a client one time, and he used to come in on the 3rd of every month. And I'd say, why do you come in on the 3rd of every month? I don't get it. And I said, what? And so he says, well, I don't know. I come in on the 3rd of every month. And I'm like, when did your back pain start? And he said, well, it started last night. I said, what was going on last night? And he says, I don't know. I was arguing with the lady. I said, what were you arguing about? And he says, the mortgage. The mortgage is due on the 5th. He goes, we don't have the money. We go spend too much money. And so all of a sudden I realized, wait, why did that happen? Right? And so I started asking questions.
Right.
And I realized that I said to him, I'm not going to touch you today. I'm not going to do anything physically to you. But I'm going to start asking questions, because I'd had these ideas, concepts in my mind. How do you rebalance the brain with everything I was thinking? And then I asked my questions, and he went home that night 80% better. Wow. And then he came back the next day, asked a few more questions. It was gone. And then I didn't see him for 6 months. And I called him. I said, where have you been? And he goes, Doc, I haven't had back pain. I goes, it's really weird. I haven't had any pain in my back. I said, this is interesting. So I started doing that with more and more clients. And then it just started to evolve into this thing where then I started helping people with money and entrepreneurship and business. And because we talk about stress, but stress happens in every area of your life. And it could be mental, it could be physical, but it could be relationships, it could be kids, it could be government, it could be COVID, right? All these things that are out there, all those things impact our physiology. And for me to help people get over that is the ultimate thing I love to do.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So let me ask you, you call yourself Dr. Rewire, or people call you Dr. Rewire. And I'm so interested in this concept of rewiring our brains. And so maybe you can kind of dive into what does that mean? What does rewiring mean to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So for rewiring, for me, the way that I talk about it, I know a lot of people use the term now, but rewiring is actually remyelinating, rebuilding the nerves in a pattern that you actually want. Most of our nerves are built in a default pattern. Our nerve connections are what our neuroassociations are. Because we build them in a state of fear. I'll give you an example, right? You're 10 years old, you see your parents get into a fight about money, bam. Now all of a sudden that becomes our pattern in our brain. That brain now creates that in our physiology. And every time we have to go ask someone for money, talk to someone about money or anything, then now we have that same physiologic response. And we call that a belief. Right? But instead of a belief, that's just a pattern. And so what I do is I take these patterns and I rewire them by rebuilding new nerve pathways through questions and rebalancing the brain. That's what rewiring is to me.
Ah, that makes a lot of sense. So you said something, beliefs are really just patterns that
Yeah,
are wired into our brain. And I look at a lot of the science of like habit formation, for
sure.
example. And what happens there is when you do something over and over and over again, your brain forms more connections between the neurons that make that activity happen. So it becomes more automatic, right?
Correct. Yep.
And so I think what you're saying is beliefs are a similar process.
They're exactly a similar process,
Ah,
right? We create these patterns out of safety. We know this is not new, right? That the brain is actually built on survival. That's why we live in the amygdala, the survival center.
right.
And everything we're responding to, we're always looking for danger in our environment.
Mm-hmm.
And so our life is a culmination of all the experiences we have. And in these experiences, we're looking to see, how do I stay safe? It doesn't care about abundance. It doesn't care how rich you want to be, how many relationships you want, the depth of your. It cares, are you going to be safe through your life? And the beliefs that we carry are the ones that we've associated to say this is safety. And so a lot of people, and I talk about money a lot, like I have a book called Wired for Wealth. And the reason I do that is because I believe that for the general population, as we talk about it, the first state of survival is money,
Yes. Yeah.
right? So for the general population, but as people then handle the money part of their life and the business part of their life, then they come to me for the side of health and performance, right? They say, okay, now help me optimize my brain from that standpoint. So like someone who's like at work as a CEO, for example, like you, right? You're running at Next Health, you're running a big organization. Like there's a different level of stress that you're dealing with that someone else who's not living is not functioning at.
Right.
How do you manage it? How do you process that? That's kind of the path of rewiring that has to come into play.
Yeah. And you're right. I mean, the amygdala, the part of our brain that's trying to keep us safe all the time, that has kind of shifted through the last, 100 generations or so, from running away from saber-toothed tigers to actually making sure you have enough money in the bank account to pay your bills.
Yeah.
And so money has become the new, I would say, metaphor of safety almost, right?
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree, right? Because the more money you have, ideally, right? The more money you have, the more resources you have to live a longer life
Right.
and do what you want out of your life.
Yeah. And stay safe.
And stay safe.
Yeah.
And stay safe.
Are there any other aspects of safety that you talk about with your clients?
Absolutely. Of course, you have relationships, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Relationships. In this work, you have different types of cases that come to you. You have cases of relationship safety, women relationship safety, all that comes along. I would also say like health, COVID. Keep going back to COVID today for some reason, right? That's our physical. And if we look at COVID, we had a massive, massive mental health challenge because most people don't look at it. They talk about the negative things that happen in their life. But really, we also have something what I've coined as a term called a positive addiction and a positive trauma. And the more we get addicted to this idea of a positive trauma, the dopamine kicks in and we get addicted to that dopamine. And then depression becomes the loss of that dopamine. And so when we look, and suicidal thoughts, all that come along, because when dopamine drops off from what we're addicted to, we create all of this anxiety and stress. And so everybody is always living in that state of survival from what they're addicted to.
Right.
It just depends. Everyone has a
Yeah.
different state. That's kind of what I've realized.
Yeah. So a positive trauma is one where you have something positive that happens that brings you to this higher state, and then when you lose that dopamine is what creates depression, anxiety, et cetera.
It does, but then what happens, right? In the work that I've done, and there's lots of research now that shows this as well, and I've just correlated it, is that when what I call a positive trauma, let's say someone goes to high school and they're a class valedictorian, right? And that was a high. And then from that high, you have to come down. We don't talk about the down, but you have to come down.
Sure.
And then what you do is you constantly chase that high.
Yeah.
And then you chase it again, and you chase it again. I'll put it in the context of business, maybe if for an example, if that's okay. Right, let's say you're trying to make $100,000 in your business. You get to 75, you say, man, I didn't hit my goal. So now you feel guilt and shame in the process. And then you go ahead and say, okay, well, now I'm going to double my goal. Nobody says I'm going to take it up 10%, manageable levels. They say, I didn't do 100, now I'm going to do 200. And then you get to 150. You actually don't get to 200. You're not grateful for the 150.
Yeah.
You say, oh, and then you do it 3 times. You say, you know what, I'm going to go for 400 in the process. And you got to 250, but you never got to 400. So what happens is these dopamine crashes causes your body to now stop setting these goals. And then that's when what we call in business and in life the 7-year itch. And the whole system starts just to fall off because we don't want to set our system to set, say, highs and lows, right? Just like blood sugar.
Sure.
The more highs and lows you have in your blood sugar, the more chaotic it becomes. The true regulation is to be able to manage the blood sugar and manage your. So when we look at the mind, we've got to make sure we manage the dopamine at the positive addiction as well.
Yeah, I mean, dopamine is a huge topic. I mean, it's so prevalent now in our life, these surges of dopamine because of our electronic devices as well. And so I always get concerned that how much our devices have completely dysregulated our control of dopamine.
So funny. My son and my daughter, like a few weeks ago, they went on their own. They're like, we're going to do a dopamine detox.
Yeah.
I said, all right, go do a dopamine detox. Let me know how it works out, right? I've never done one. I was like, I'm pretty regulated with it. I'm pretty good control with it. And they did. And my son, like after the second day, he's like, what am I doing? I have nothing to do. What, I have nothing to do? Because we're so addicted to these things.
Sure.
And we need that constant stimulation. Sometimes, and when we talk about mindfulness, as we were saying, or just sometimes grounding and going in nature and just there's power in that too.
Yeah. So what do you think about dopamine detoxes?
I personally think that they don't do anything. To be very honest with you, because what's going to happen is you're going to go back to the same cycle what you did before.
Yeah.
So you get this detox. It's like when people go on cleanses, right? Sure, it's good, but what have you really changed with the lifestyle? Because I think we have a lot of hacks, I'll call them, out there in the marketplace for health, and that, do a detox, do a cleanse, do this. Okay, but if you go back to eating McDonald's and fries and Coke every other day, your detox isn't really worth anything.
Absolutely.
If you're going to do it, you've got to make it a complete life change.
Sure.
And something that's consistent, in my opinion.
No, you're absolutely right. And so we talk a lot about that with our patients, specifically around weight loss and managing their metabolic health. And so a good analogy there is when people lose weight on a GLP-1 medication, for example, how do we make that consistent to last forever rather than just a temporary fix, right?
I think that's so important. I'm glad that you guys do, because I see so many people on GLP-1s and clients and that, and I'm like, guys, the muscle wasting that's happening is tremendous, and the public doesn't know, and it's being marketed. And that's why the work that you guys do at Next Health is so important, because as you're educating them, now use it for what it's meant to do, but then you got to change your lifestyle.
Yeah, no, it's so true. So let's talk about your process with clients, because I would love to kind of make this real for people. And though I guess the entire thing that we're talking about here, the entire preface of this conversation is how do we achieve a state of mental health that serves us for the long term? Is that right? And so there's a lot of facets to this. One is, of course, decreasing addiction, attacking stress, maybe addressing depression, addressing traumas. But there's also someone that is just going through life, kind of like you mentioned me. Yeah. I am a CEO. I have a business. I want to make sure I have longevity to my mental health, right?
For sure.
And so maybe we can talk about that first, and then we can dive into the topics of some of the other things that we talk about, addiction, depression, et cetera, as well, if that's okay with you. So, and I know you see a lot of clients like myself, potentially, that is a CEO or someone running a business or just someone that's just, attacking life and doing well. Yeah. What process do you put them through to optimize their mental health?
It really depends on the person and the scenario, right? It's like when you were doing surgery. I'll give you an analogy, right? When you're doing surgery, every case is uniquely different.
Right.
It just is. And sometimes we try to try to generalize it. But I have developed 120 different processes.
120. Wow.
120 is so far what I've put together. Just that I've documented. These are the tools that you use, and that's what I teach my clients. And then I'm like, okay, use this. Now this is what you do. It's like going to the gym, right? How do you do a bicep curl? You got to teach. This is how you do this. So we do this for the mind, mental fitness, so to speak, as many people are starting to use the language, right? So one of the tools is just a rebalancing of the brain, right? I always say that you can't heal, which is an acronym that I use, which means helping emotions align with love. What I call love, not an ethereal space, but just a love for yourself.
Got it.
Right? Because I think ultimately that's the real healer anyways.
Sure.
So the first thing is that you have to take every event, and the emotion has to come into a state of balance.
Okay.
Because if we don't, that's going to linger in our nervous system. So first you do is you go to the event. You go to the moment. Go to the actual moment of something happens. So let's say, for example, you're at home, and your mom yells at you. Okay, great. Your mom yelled at you. And so you say, okay, what did she yell to you about? What was the context? she yelled at you because you didn't clean your room. I'm thinking about my kids right now, right? Right?
Yeah.
And so she didn't, or let's use a CEO, for example. Let's use a CEO in a business setting that maybe you had an employee that stole from you.
Right.
Okay, let's take it a real
Okay.
deeper context. So an employee that stole from you, and so when you go to that moment, what was the belief? The belief was that she or he shouldn't have stole from you. Right? That's the belief. Now, at that time, what's the anti-belief? And the anti-belief, because there's something in our brains that it was discovered in Scientific American in April 2016. There's something called a neuron, but then there's the anti-neuron.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So we have memories and we have anti-memories
Okay.
in our brain to rebalance.
Interesting.
And it's almost like this virtual world
Oh.
in our brains.
Wow.
And so you take the anti-belief and say, what's the anti-belief? The opposite of that. So the belief was that, okay, she shouldn't have stolen from me. She did steal from me. Okay, so the fact that she did steal from you, how did that serve you? And if you go list out 5, 10, 15, 20 things of that, and you go find out, then what happens is your brain automatically rebalances the myelination of both sets of neurons.
Okay.
And then they start to become more congruent. And then you realize that, oh, there was just as many good things that happened from this as bad things. And when those start to balance, that's when our nervous system, our homeostatic mechanisms start in our body to balance out.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So, I use this a lot, and I didn't even know this was your process, but
Sure.
I do use this a lot when I'm going through an experience. Maybe I just don't want to be in that experience, whatever it is. Maybe it's a movie I don't want to be at. I just don't, the movie's not speaking to me or whatever. Then I kind of switch my mindset into, okay, well, what can I learn from watching this movie? Or what can I learn from this entire experience of just being here, et cetera?
Sure.
And it makes you look at things in a more positive light, whether it's a negative experience or not.
Yeah, it's a little bit different. I'm not I completely saying that's smart. I think truly intelligent, successful people naturally do that.
Got it.
I do believe that. I have seen that. But what happens is that we have these patterns that with the event and the emotion that has to happen, when that an event and the emotion is in that place, like something negative happens or any of these things happen, then we have to take that and rebalance that. The actual event.
The actual event.
The actual event.
Right.
Right? Because you're intellectually savvy, you're smart, and smart people and successful people typically are good at that. They say, oh, just typically what you just said, oh yeah, I do the same thing. I turn it and I turn the negative into positive.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm saying we got to take the event and rebalance the event. Rewiring is rebalancing,
Got it.
not just thinking positive. Because we need negative thinking. We need positive thinking. We need critical thinking. All of it is necessary for our survival.
So what does rebalancing the events do for your brain?
What it does, it resets the actual myelination path.
Okay.
It says, oh, this is where the event started. The perception of the event started at that time. And when the perception started at that time, everything from there forward has been a cascade of neuroassociations.
Okay.
So when we go back to the event, that now starts to recreate a new pathway, another road. If you take, for example, I'm trying to think of a road, right? If you go to the beginning of a road,
Right.
that road is now different in that pathway. But if we take that road and only go one direction, then we can take offshoots from that road. And then we can say, oh, yeah, I can see that, but they're all, those neurons and those firings are still there. If we go to the beginning and then go a completely different direction, we rebalance it.
Yeah.
And so what we're doing is we're rebalancing it in the physiologic state, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system.
Got it. Okay. And so what are some of the other tools? That's one tool out of 120. What are a couple of the other tools you find very helpful with your clients?
I would sit and say, like, just taking, a lot of people live in I would say, guilt,
Okay.
right? And guilt is defined as something that you think that you've caused someone else more pain than pleasure,
Sure.
right? So it's a pretty simple def. But if you start looking, saying, how does it that you help them? How did your action actually help them? Then you realize that actually your action actually served them as well. Or you take, say, for example, one of the big things that I found, if we go back to the positive trauma scenario, the positive addiction, is someone who is successful, right? One of the things that I'll tell you is that find the actual drawbacks of your success. Level yourself, because that's the dopamine addiction that causes more problems.
Right. Right.
Right? Let's look at, if you look at like the famous athletes who've
Yeah.
destroyed themselves, like an Allen Iverson or something like that, right back in the day, they couldn't manage their emotions. They think they're the next gift to the world. And I never worked with Allen Iverson, so I'm not stating that about him. But like all these people that can't govern, they self-destruct
Sure.
it's because of the successes, not the failures.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. I mean, and you're right. They probably never took time to rebalance themselves.
They don't. And when you start getting accolades from the world and everyone thinks you're the next coming, so to speak, it's hard,
Yeah.
right? It's hard. Like you're the greatest golfer, the greatest tennis player, the greatest athlete, right? It's hard not to sit and say, you know what, I am. And
Yeah.
everyone gives you all the accolades, all the success, fame that comes along with it. That's why a lot of celebrities and that they really struggle with staying on top.
Sure, sure. And so how often should one, if you're a successful person, you're doing great, how often does one rebalance themselves? How do they do that? What's kind of like the actual protocol used for that?
So there's a couple ways to do it. I think it's something that you do daily, just like going to the gym, right? Because I like to sit and say, do you eat every day? Then you need to burn the glucose every day, right? Do you think every day? Then you need to balance your brain every day. It's kind of like the way that I look at it. And so like I would sit and say, like I have a morning exercise, what I call my focus routine, right? And my focus routine is I look throughout the day, and most people are looking for, and they start their day with, here's what I'm excited about, here are the positive things. I actually flip that equation. I say, okay, what are my challenges today? I look for the challenges so I don't get super elated. I look for the challenges, and then when I get the challenges, I turn around and say, okay, now what are the actuals, how are these challenges serving me? And I start my day in that fashion. So I don't get over excited about my day. I'm pretty level, pretty even keel. And then at the end of the day, I look at it and say, what things went well and how is that a drawback? And what things went great or went horrible and how did that serve? And I'm rebalancing on every side of this equation, right? If the blood sugar is too high. And the way that we think is also affecting our metabolism.
Absolutely.
Right? And and we've shown this, we know this, that dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, the catecholamines is what causes blood sugar imbalance.
Yeah, for sure.
So a lot of times when I used to have clients back when I was in practice, they'd come in and when I was doing stuff like neuropathy and things like that, they'd come in and say, I have blood sugar problems. I'm diabetic or pre-diabetic. But you look at them, they've got maybe 10% body fat, super healthy. They're like, why do they have that? Because they're stuck in anger. I remember the specific case, just stuck in anger. And the more angry, the more blood sugar, the more cortisol goes up.
Absolutely. Right.
So
is this something that everyone should be doing, but rebalancing on a day-to-day basis?
I think so. So my kids do it. My family does it. It's something that when I teach people to do, it's something that you should do on a day-to-day basis. Like you should exercise every Sunday, right? It just is. And it will create better focus and congruence and coherence of the brain. I remember we did an EEG, and we were looking at what's called the P300.
Okay.
Right? And we found that I tested on a guy, and I worked with him for 40 minutes. His brain, he was a 35-year-old Navy guy. So you look at him, he looks super fit, super healthy. Yeah. His brain age, because he was stuck in an emotional pattern because his father had passed away about 2 years ago. He was 42 years old.
Oh, wow.
And so I rewired him. I worked through that piece. And then 40 minutes later, we rescanned him again. His brain age went down to 24. And so I talked to the neurophysiologist, and they're like, that's impossible. That's not supposed to happen. Now, I was like, well, I don't know. I do this every day. And so we did it with 100 people, and we found the average brain age from people, the average, went down 16 years in brain age decrease. Now, what that means is that the brain is now more coherent and working much more connected and faster.
Interesting. And you can tell this with an EEG.
With an EEG.
Is this something that, this brain age calculation, is this something that many EEG
I don't think that they do.
Or?
I don't think they do. I think it's some people use it as the brain boon age, whatnot.
Yeah.
Used it. So it's a different mechanism, but I like quantifying it. But it's I just use it as a number. But if you really want to look at the stat, it's the P300.
It's the P300.
P300 it's more of a universal.
Got it.
But the brain age is more common for people to understand. So
Got it. And you're obviously doing sessions with people where you're sitting down with them, you're talking them through how to rewire their brain. But how can someone do this on themselves at home? Is it just a process where you can sit down and just do exactly what you said earlier? Or?
You can, or I actually developed an app.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, I developed an app. It's called the UltiMind app.
Okay.
And the UltiMind app, you can go and you do it. And what we've done is we've done a voice AI. So you talk into the app and it says, oh, hey, here's what your emotions are.
Oh.
And then from that, you actually, as an AI, and I take you through the process of how to rewire those emotions.
Huh.
So anybody can do it anywhere in the world at any point in time. Because, yeah, sure, like, right, like the celebrities and that, sure, they can, you have time to, you make time in that. But I can't get to everybody. It's not possible. But this app is a way that everyone can go in and rewire their brain every day and use it to rebalance their mind.
Wow. And how long does this process take on the app?
5 minutes.
5 minutes a day.
5 minutes a day.
And you take people through. So it uses AI to detect your emotional state.
Correct.
And it takes you through your methodology for rewiring this to where it creates better long-term mental health.
100%. That's exactly right. And we're now in the process, and we're working with Apple Health to now show how the app and how you rewire is going to affect your HRV, because it does. It lowers your HRV.
I mean, I think it's the ultimate measurement of having having good mental health. HRV definitely helps you to understand what is the current state of your mental health, right?
Absolutely, right? Yeah. Like I remember, just personally, like I was under a stressful period a couple of weeks ago. We all go through them. Yeah. And my HRV was low, and I was like, there it is. And then I got the stressful thing relieved. That night, my HRV jumped like 40 points, right?
Right.
And we have all these devices.
Sure.
Right? We're wearing rings and watches and beds and mats and all this stuff that's measuring all this stuff, but none of it is looking at the emotional side of it. They're looking at the physical, go exercise, diet, hyperbaric, all these physical modalities.
Right. No, that's so true.
But here's the emotional modality.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the apps that have, like you're wearing an Oura ring, I see, so am I, and they have different meditations and things like that on there that help improve your HRV, but none of it's really centered around mental health and rewiring, right?
It's not. Yeah. We're working on trying to get in to partner with some of these types of organizations.
Sure.
I don't want to go build a ring or an app
right.
I think that's not my forte. But can we partner with some of these organizations to be able to bring the Rewire modality and these things to people? That's kind of what we're trying to do, because then you can take it and say, look, I just did the Oura ring, and you know what? I'm rewiring, and here's my data. I'm not rewiring, here's my data.
Yeah.
And now you know it. Now it's like a CGM, right?
Yes, exactly.
Why is a CGM so valuable in today's world? Because look, you ate pizza, you get your insulin, your sugar spiked. You don't eat pizza, and you had, some granola, and it had a different response. Everyone knows that. So that's the problem.
I know a lot of people that are working on their HRV all the time and doing things like breath work, meditation, getting enough sleep. All these things work. But there really is not a lot of talk about rewiring your brain and how you handle emotional distress in HRV world. So I'm happy to see that that's kind of what you're bringing to the table here as another modality.
We're trying, right? We're trying. And then the HRV, like we know, like as a fact, right? We talk about sleep. Okay, this is the American problem. We're blaming cell phones. We're blaming all these things, the colors of the room and all the stuff that we're doing. I do it too. So I'm just as guilty as well. But try going to bed and having an argument with your spouse.
Yeah.
Do all the red lights you want in your room.
Yeah.
Put all the crap you want to. Your HRV's tanking, I guarantee it.
Right.
Right? And so in the REM sleep, as we know, REM sleep is for your mind, deep sleep is for your body. Mm-hmm. And so we know that the more you actually balance your brain, you actually REM sleep increases. So for someone like a CEO, I measure these types of things and say, okay, let's look at the protocol and let's look at your REM sleep every single night. Mm-hmm. Let's look at the actual inflammation.
Sure.
And we're looking at this to say, okay, like I personally get about 2.5 hours of REM sleep every night because I make this thing a very important part of my life.
Wow. 2.5 hours is incredibly good.
For REM sleep, it is.
Yeah.
It is.
And do you build up to that over time, or does it like happen immediately on the first use of this methodology?
I think it's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
And I think it's something that builds up over time.
Yeah.
Right? And the reason I'm saying that is because when I look at my data, this is who I am, mm-hmm. right? This is what I do.
Sure.
But when I look at a CEO or someone like that, I think if I really look at it, it's stair steps.
Yeah.
It's like our mind is like an onion, right? You got to take one layer at a time.
Yeah.
And then eventually you kind of live in a world of Zen.
Right. Right. And is that what this is really all about? Is like getting to a point where your brain is balanced and you're living, like you said, in a state of Zen, pretty much in a consistent day-to-day routine? Is that kind of what you're trying to achieve with your clients?
What I think I'm trying to get them to do is stay emotionally regulated,
Uh-huh.
right? Like Harvard did a study, and they said that the most important, your alma mater, right, is what they did a study that said, the most important attribute for a CEO is emotional regulation.
That's so true, right?
Is emotional regulation, and that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to help people regulate their emotions so that they don't create illness and then don't create decisions that are poor for themselves.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And this is true for everybody. Everyone living in modern society needs this.
That's the hard part in marketing it.
Yes.
Everybody needs it, but it's hard to market it because everybody needs it. So you can't niche it. It's not easy to niche and narrow.
No. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like meditation. Everyone needs to meditate. Everyone needs to de-stress. But how do you get this message out to people at a big scale? It's difficult.
I think
Well,
so.
that's what this podcast is doing.
Well, that's why we're here. So thank you for that. I appreciate that, right?
I love it. Okay, so this is for your, I would say, average individual just going through life. They need this methodology to regulate their emotional health. What about if someone is having major dysregulation of their emotional health? Say someone is depressed or manic or bipolar. Are there additional methodologies that you use to help them kind of regulate that?
Yeah, it is. And it's really, depending on the level, I will tell you that, depending on the level, it takes a little bit more of a hands-on approach, right?
Right,
It
absolutely.
definitely takes a hands-on approach. But when I look at a client, I look at a scenario, I look at it and say, okay, there's the mental side, but if I don't get them to move, nothing's going to matter.
Sure.
Right? I got to get them to move. I got to get them to work out. Because a lot of times what I think people do is and I've seen this just with clients over the years, they just say, oh, I'm just going to do the mental piece. And I think that's not what I'm saying by any means.
Yeah.
It's the mind and the body.
Sure.
You need to work out. You need to move. You need to get oxygen in the body. And so when someone is like at that state, there is like levels that you need to work with someone individually. And we do have programs and courses and things like that help people that they can watch it, they can learn it, they can do that for themselves. And my goal is not to make people dependent on me. My goal is to get people independent of me.
Sure.
So that they can take the tools and apply it. And what inspires me more than anything else is when they learn it and then they teach their kids.
Yeah.
That's the most inspiring thing to me.
Absolutely. Right.
Because I've seen my kids just function differently through life, through challenges, because they have these tools at their disposal.
Yeah, that's fantastic. One of the things that we talked about a little earlier was this whole concept of the amygdala and how it's connected to your frontal cortex, right? And so maybe you can dive into a little bit of the science there.
Yeah.
And what is your take on how do we modify those connections?
So let me geek out just for a second,
Sure.
right? Not compared to you, but geek out for me, right?
No, absolutely. Let's do it. I love geeking out.
So every perception in our mind is traveling through our hippocampus and our hypothalamus.
Right.
And our hypothalamus is now filtering our reality for the things that we are looking for. And I know everyone says, oh, it's the reticular activating system that's looking for it. It's actually the basal nucleus in the pulvinar region of the hypothalamus.
Okay.
It's filtering to see what's important. I call that your rewired DNA. The rewired DNA is saying, this is what's important, this is what I value, and this is my identity. So it looks to see, what is my identity? Is this matching my identity or not matching my identity? If it matches my identity, I move towards it. If it's not matching my identity, I move away from it, right? It's just in a wave towards our wave value. Whatever then becomes challenging, if it's challenging our values, it moves into the amygdala and then stays stuck in that state and becomes a state of fear.
Right.
If we move it to the prefrontal cortex, where our blood oxygen is more centered, we're more governed, we're more organized, strategic thinking, foresight, all that lives in the prefrontal cortex, in the telencephalon, which means foresight. So our brain is designed in fear to foresight. So what we do is that we filter our reality to move it in towards foresight. That's why a CEO doesn't really live in fear. They're not emotionally erratic. They're not living in massive states of anxiety or depression because they can rationally, cognitively bring it to their forebrain.
Right.
And so they move it towards where they want to go. So that's the basic anatomy of the brain with that. But the Rewire DNA, knowing that principle, knowing what that is very important.
Right, right. Because once you know that that principle exists, you can kind of think towards that pattern and move things where you want them to go. Right?
Yeah, well, you know why you do what you do.
Exactly.
I think that's the biggest question.
Yes,
that
yes.
People sit and say, they judge themselves. They beat themselves up. I was supposed to do this. I needed to do this, but I didn't. And all this internal chatter becomes negative to themselves. But if you realize that this is who you are, this is what you do, this is why you make the decisions you do, there's no judgment.
Right.
You just walk through it. That's how you live life. And you get the freedom to actually know yourself and, as they say, right, know thyself.
Right, right, exactly. What is your take on people getting therapy or having a therapist that they meet with on a regular cadence, whether they feel like they want someone or not? I have a lot of patients that ask me, should I get a therapist? Should that be part of my team, et cetera? What are your thoughts around that?
So I think anywhere that you are managing your emotions is valuable.
Okay.
I do think that. Because I think that emotions are, and I was saying this before we actually even started, I think that, I would say any chronically based diseases, 99% of them stem from the emotional state. They stem from an emotion. Now, I don't have that as a validated source, but that's my opinion, right?
Right.
That may be anecdotal. But that's what I do believe that I've seen that over the years. So I think a therapist is valuable.
Yeah.
I find that my modality, I see a lot of people who've gone through therapy, and my rewiring process helps them get there faster.
Sure.
Right? I almost call it an anti-therapy approach, to be very honest.
Really?
I
Interesting.
do. It's kind of anti-therapy because therapy traditionally takes time.
Sure.
And you tell them how you feel. And I'm being very generalizing for sure,
Right.
right? So I'm not to step on anyone's toes. I don't need people's stories because the more you tell the stories, the more you're myelinating the pathway.
So true. Right.
And so I'm like, I don't want your stories. I just want to rebalance the brain.
Yeah.
Right? Take that 4-step process, do that to everything you do. Or when you get on the app, to take the steps, the questions, rebalance the brain, and then stop telling the story. Because the more you tell the story, the more you're making it live in your brain.
Yeah. There's this whole focus now, I think, on reliving your traumas over and over again to work through them. And people are, you're shaking your head no, and I love that because I think that's like, the trend now is to go through and relive your traumas and address your traumas. And people are even seeking psychedelic help to address trauma. So tell me your thoughts and why you're shaking your head over
Well,
that.
you just think about it from a neurophysiologic pathway, right? And let me go science just for a second.
Yes, please.
Because every time you go, if you remember your dad spanking you on the bottom, I'm using a very general one, right? So, and you at that moment, your brain said, "Oh my God, this is bad. This is negative." You released all the cortisol, all the stress, the substance P, and then now you're going to go relive that again, and you're going to re-elicit all of those neurotransmitters and neurohormones in the body. So you're not reliving it and moving away from it. You're actually reliving it to relive it, and continuing to myelinate that same pathway, right? So
You're reinforcing that pathway.
you're reinforcing it,
Right.
and so I know that people sit and say, you know what, let me go do a psychedelic like ayahuasca or all these types of things that are out there
Sure.
and doing that. But what they're doing is they're disassociating their brains, right? They're disassociating their thought process. They're disassociating what they're doing. Like I'm a big fan of Dr. Amen.
Yeah.
I love everything he says. I agree with him with everything he says, right? And he's got so many years of experience behind it, but I love everything he says. When he says, like, you've got to manage the dopamine and the glucose, and that's what you got to do. When we start going back into the same pattern, we are throwing our body back into a neurologically, emotionally dysregulated state.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And so what should people do instead if they feel that these past traumas are affecting their current emotional status?
And download the app first.
Yeah.
It sounds a little promotional,
Right.
but I don't know what else is out there, right? Or take if you really want to go relive it, then go to it and breathe, right? Breathe at it rather than talking about it, and like just breathing is an important part. That's why I use the word inspire,
Right.
right? Because all that memory is stored in our cellular memory. Every single all the organs, everything in our body, and there's lots of studies that have shown this, is that our emotions get stuck in our muscles, right? We have physical muscles that we work with, but what about our organs? Our organs are all muscles too. And so we have ailments, issues that get locked in our physiology and our muscles. So if you take the event, take the moment, and you breathe, you actually have a better chance of, I think, of helping it rather than just reliving it.
Okay. I just remember this, that I listened to an Andrew Huberman podcast about dealing with traumas. And one of the protocols he has that he says is very well researched is actually writing about the trauma for 30 minutes straight. I think it's like 2 or 3 times you do this. And this kind of helps the mind move away from this trauma. Did you hear that episode? Have you ever heard of this?
I did. I love Andrew Huberman, but I haven't heard that episode necessarily.
Look this up. It's a writing protocol to deal with past traumas.
Okay.
And I wonder if there's almost like a desensitization aspect to this.
Yeah, so there is, right? Like there's a systematic, maybe that's kind of what the path they're trying to do too, but it's a systematic desensitization.
Yeah.
So if you keep reliving it, it doesn't really phase you.
Right.
But that's not integrating it.
No.
That's just making yourself numb.
Numb to it, right.
Right? That's not living either. Like you can do a shot of vodka and make yourself numb.
Right.
But I think like it's different when I like to say a lot of times there's 3 phases, in my opinion, that people take through trauma. There's the numbing it phase, there's the intellectualizing it phase, and then there's the integrating it phase. So if we're numb to it, we're just kind of frozen.
Yeah.
Right? Our sympathetic kicks on. We're frozen to reality. We're frozen to it. We're just walking through life. And I think a lot of people, unfortunately, live that way. I really just do.
Yep.
And then we get smart. Right? And we get like CEOs and people who are intellectual, they rationalize and they intellectualize it.
Sure.
And so they say, I'm smart, I can figure that piece out. But then what it's not doing is it's not integrating it. As we started the conversation, whenever we started a while ago, it was about the mind and the body both integrating the two versus just intellectualizing.
Sure.
And so that becomes the difference.
Got it. And so what we're doing with your 4-step process is an integration, but what you're doing is you're stimulating the anti-neurons and the anti-memory to create a balance more than anything. Got it. And so say for a traumatic event, how are you stimulating the anti-neurons there?
So there's a whole series of questions that has to happen.
Sure.
It's not a linear process necessarily.
Okay.
And there's multiple different factors, but it depends on I hate being generalized with it.
Yeah.
It just depends on
absolutely
trauma.
Of course, right.
Let's just I'm trying to think of that.
Let's use an example
sure.
of a trauma of childhood traumas are major in most people's lives. Say you had a really abusive household, to go to the extreme. How would you create the anti-neurons to balance that memory?
So you can take that same memory and take the 4-step method I just went through and use that exact methodology to say, okay, so when you were a child, go to that moment, right? So you were being spanked. So let's go back to that. So you were spanked. Okay, great. Now what was the belief? That you shouldn't have been spanked.
Right.
Right? Because that's why you're pissed off. That's why you're resentful. Because your belief was that your dad shouldn't have hit you, your mom shouldn't have hit you, your brother shouldn't have hit you, or all the stuff that happens in people's lives.
Sure.
Right? Then you say, okay, great. So what was the anti-belief of that? The anti-belief is that I should be hit. Right?
Mm.
And if that happened, how would that have been a disservice? So then you sit and say, oh, but actually if I did that, I wouldn't have grown up. I wouldn't have become stronger. I wouldn't have become more resilient. I wouldn't have become a leader. And then you start saying, realizing, wait, it's that event that created this person to become the person it is. And we think about it intellectually, right?
Yeah.
We can say, I went through this stuff. But if we don't go to that moment of it, we don't heal it.
Got it.
That's the difference.
So getting to that moment in your mind and then having these anti-belief thoughts and understanding how this actually might have served you or kind of having almost the opposite reaction creates that emotional regulation.
Correct.
Oh, so interesting. And has this been shown, is this something that you kind of developed or is this based on other psychological theory or process?
It's majority through my process, what I've done.
Yeah.
I've studied with a lot of different people, different things.
Sure.
Right? I've studied with tapping, EFT, demartini. Yeah. I've studied with lots of different people. But the whole premise, what I figured out was that if we rebalance the system, it's about rebalancing the parasympathetic and sympathetic. Mm. So every perception has a sympathetic and parasympathetic perception. And so once we start to govern those, we don't get emotionally erratic.
Got it. Okay.
So it's been through years of study to develop where we are today.
Yeah, and you use this with patients all the time.
All the time.
Yeah, and so, can you give us an example of a patient that you maybe recently saw or someone that how it changed their life?
I'll give you a really, really drastic one if you want.
Okay, sure.
I had a lady, she came to me and she was stuck with, she was having marital problems.
Okay.
And she says, I really want to work on my marriage. And I said, okay, great. And I knew that she had Crohn's disease.
Mm-hmm.
And by no means am I curing anything here,
Sure.
right in this conversation. So she said, I said, okay, when did it start? She says, it's genetic. I'm like, I don't know about that. It's not genetic. She said, well, that's what the doctor said. And I said, well, BS to that. I call BS to that. And so I had to go, and what I found is that when she was 18 months old, she actually had a very traumatic event, right? And people's lives are very different. So this is going to sound very horrific, and I don't mean to, but like her mom was holding her on her hip, and her dad basically was abusing the mom.
Oh, wow.
Super tough. So all that fear, this young baby took into her colon, made it a spastic colon.
Mm-hmm.
And so for the next 40 years of her life, any trigger, any trauma, anything that stimulated that episode now creates a Crohn's relapse.
Sure.
And so I went in, I found it, and our mind holds on to these memories, all of them. And I found it, and I went and I worked on it. And in 26 minutes later, Darshan, I kid you not, I was done. She was grateful for the whole experience. And her mind went there, healed it. And from that moment on, now going on 8.5 years, Crohn's was gone from that moment. No illness at that point. She came back the next day and she's like, I can't believe what it's like to actually have a real bowel movement.
Yeah.
And that's a health scenario, right?
Sure.
But then you take this and then you apply this to business, because the thing is, it's all connected.
Mm-hmm.
So you help heal that part of your life. All of a sudden now money starts to show up and business opportunities show up. This is how I got into this world, working with business leaders.
Yeah.
I didn't start as a business guy, right? I didn't go to MBA school or anything like that. But what I did is I started working with people and their bodies and their emotions, and they started getting better physically and emotionally and financially. And they're like, wait a minute, this is all kind of correlative. Whenever I work with Dr. Rewire, all this changed. That's what happened. So that's how the whole world came to be for me.
That's amazing. And now this is the focus of your career. This is what you do. And do you see patients privately, or do you?
So I don't have a clinical practice
Right.
anymore. Because I don't really adhere to the insurance model and all that stuff that you just can't do. So I take clients individually, right? I do work with people individually, but we also have programs where I teach people, and my goal is to teach people how to do it more. So we have courses and programs and masterminds and things like that.
Great.
But
Okay.
we're doing that as well.
And so people can attend a course and learn this methodology. Got it.
They can attend courses. They can come to my live events where I do live events where they can, we do events on health, wealth, and relationships. And I do an event called Creation. It's kind of like my, and I help them really heal parts of their lives that they didn't even know.
Wow. Okay. And then you also have the app where people can do this whole process themselves.
Yep. Yeah, they have the app. The app is called the UltiMind app.
Right.
And the UltiMind is for the ultimate mind.
Yeah.
That's kind of where my premise would be. What's the ultimate mind? The ultimate mind is a balanced mind.
Yeah.
So that's where they can do that. There's books. I've written a couple books. Wired for Wealth was about money, about rebalancing your mind and emotions around money. And then Chasing Success was that was my first book. It was more about a story about family and relationships.
Fantastic. Okay. And you're on social media as well.
I am Dr. Rewire everywhere.
Yeah, Dr. Rewire everywhere. Well, great. Well, this is such a great introduction to this new methodology that I've actually never heard of until you explained this to me.
Yeah.
I actually can't wait to download the app and do it. Start working on this. Right, exactly. And I think what's important too is that people know that this exists, that it can potentially cause physiologic benefits, definitely, of course, psychological benefits. And like you said, maybe your HRV can get better as well. You sleep better, et cetera. And it's always good to be able to have multiple modalities that you can use to address this black box up here, It is a black box, right?
It is. And it's great, right? There's so many people that are helping. And if this is a modality that you can use and it assists your life, then that's the goal.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I really
thank you so much
appreciate
for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, this is great. Thank you.
Thanks.